knowledge pieces and to some insights on the smart cities and digitalization area that could be of interest through this insights platform and specific knowledge pieces that we develop or our partners develop. And finally, we also do this kind of training such as this one to facilitate to access some expertise and some insights to work on these domains. Today being about data governance in general, I think that it is worth to mention also the UNDP digital strategy. As most of you know, we have at UNDP we have a strategy that sets the objectives and the vision on how we want to promote and use as well as possible digital tools for sustainable development. This strategy has two pathways, let's say. One is for internal transformation and how to become more efficient by using digital tools, but also another one is about how to support our government partners, etc., to use these digital tools for for achieving their development goals. And within this digital strategy, we are also developing a UNDP data strategy. Here you can see the principles, and I think that it is quite pertinent to put them here and to have a look at them and as a reference, because the speakers today will precisely be talking about some of these principles or making reference to some of these principles on how to create an enabling environment, how to facilitate interoperability, or how to make data open for everyone. So just to quickly introduce these two strategies. So with no further delay, I will leave it to our speakers. First of all, we have Jay Sagar. He's applied research lead of the London Office of Technology and Innovation in the UK. He will be presenting, first of all, some lessons learned from their experience working with London boroughs on how to create this enabling environment for a data strategy. And afterwards, we will have Suti Sangiram from Open North in Canada. He's the data project manager, and he will be providing an overview on what is open data, what are the main principles that are needed to be taken into consideration, and some insights on how to manage open data related projects. Thank you very much to both the speakers because it's for their time and for agreeing to participate today. And also just as a housekeeping, just to let you know that we will be doing first the two presentations, and afterwards we will have a 10 minutes questions and answers. So do not hesitate to put your comments or questions in the chat box or in the specific questions and answers box, and then Urna will pick up some of them for the speakers. So thank you very much, and Jai, over to you.
Great, thanks. Let me just share my screen. Have you got that up?
Yes, it's perfect.
Great. Hi, I'm Jay Sagar, Data Projects Manager here at LOTI. Today, I want to talk to you about LOTI's work to improve data collaboration in London, the approaches we've taken and some of the lessons we've learned along the way. I'll just start with a quick intro to what LOTI is and where we sit in the local government ecosystem. So LOTI is a London Office of Technology and Innovation. Our aim is to support London with digital data and innovation projects. We're part of London local government, and we have a remit to support our 19 members, who are kind of a self-selecting group of London boroughs that are sort of most interested in working together on tackling some of these more challenging issues around data, digital and innovation. But everything we produce is open and available for anyone in London, and actually anyone in the UK and anyone in the world to look at and to use, recycle, and we very much encourage that kind of principle. So everything we do is available on our website, and anything I talk about today you can go and look at in more detail and take and adapt for your context, and we'd be super interested to hear what you do with it and what you make of it and how you improve it. So when we talk about data sharing and analytics, we dream about big data sets, elegant analytical models, sophisticated insights, all of the good stuff that's at the kind of, you know, the insightful end of doing things with data. I think anyone who works with data knows that the reality of that, you know, is less common and quite hard to achieve in most organizations, let alone at a city level. And, you know, it's the usual things that get in the way: data quality, data availability, The organisations involve data capabilities, skills, etc., and systems, and also knowledge around what's actually legal to do with that data and what's ethical to do with that data as well. Probably should be on there too. It's compounded when you go from an individual organisation in local government or anywhere really, and scale that up and try to work with others in a partnership. All of those issues each individual organisation has, and then you have it at the group level, making our dreams of doing sophisticated, exciting work with data much harder to achieve. And from a LOTI perspective, we realise that we'll very much advocate for the advanced end of doing things, insightful work with data, but in some ways, before we get to that point, we need to set the groundwork and set up some foundations and principles, ways of working, things that can make it easier for all of our London boroughs and other partner organisations in London to work with data, to share data, to get to that foundation, which will then allow us to do all of the exciting things with data that we dream of doing. So what we've put in place is 6 principles, which are kind of a starting point to get data sharing going across the city. They're designed to make it easier for anyone who's running a project or in a team that wants to do something with data, but is encountering all of the different difficulties around how do I do this from a technical perspective, how do I get all the legal issues in line and resolve all of those. How do I make sure I'm doing it in an ethical way? Most of the kind of principles we just saw on some of the previous slides. There's a lot there to do, and it's difficult for individual teams to be experts at all of it. So we wanted to kind of put at least some of the knowledge out there for people to just take off the shelf and use themselves. I'd say we haven't, we're still at the beginning of this journey, and there's still a lot more to do. But starting with these principles has been really helpful, and I'll take you through some of what we've done. So that's what I'm going to play. We set out 6 principles to start with, a kind of short number of things for people to get involved with. Number 1 is, when considering any type of data project, starting with outcomes. Basically, that's the number 1 thing for us. All of the other more difficult parts of data sharing around the legal and ethical side of things are much easier if you start with the right outcomes in mind, or understanding what your outcomes are. So we've got a kind of a methodology for doing this. You could probably come up with any, but as long as you start with the outcomes, who is it that you're trying to help? What are you trying to change in the world? If you start with that, rather than thinking about what data set I need, what technology I need, you start with what you're trying to change in the world and work backwards to make sure that you're actually focusing on something which is tangible and real and going to benefit someone in society, someone in your city, someone in a business in your city, or an environmental outcome. Then you're much more likely, when it comes to the questions of why do you need to combine these data sets together, why do you need to share this data with this other organization, you can answer that because you've got in mind who you're trying to help and why. So we very, very much focus on, tell everyone in London to focus on outcomes when they're designing any type of data sharing or collaboration project, or insight project for that matter. So number 1 for us, outcomes. Seems simple, but it's a really important way of thinking to make this easier and to make sure we're focused on doing something which is positive in the world rather than just like an exciting tech or data project. Number 2 is something we have in London, which I think we're very grateful we have, and I think we'd encourage other cities and regions to look at this approach. The London Data Store is a repository of data that is available for all to use in London. It started as an open data store, so it was mostly open data sets on there, but it has been upgraded so that now the different London regional government boroughs and other voluntary and charity organisations and companies can post data on there as well, and you can post data privately. So if 2 boroughs, which are kind of our smaller government regions in London, want to share data between each other to understand a specific outcome for, say, vulnerable children, then they can do that in a secure way. It's a neutral place to do that, and we're able to build in some really good technical features as well to make that easier. So if I just skip forward and show you. So for example, data that's uploaded to the data store, we can apply some data validation to it. Fairly simple at this point, but it means that if there are certain data fields which shouldn't be shared, those can be removed before it's uploaded to the server. You can check that you've got the right types of characters and character lengths in certain fields. That kind of simple validation. And also, probably the most useful thing from a kind of technical perspective is that there are APIs available, so that those data teams who wanting to push and pull data to the data store can do that in a much easier way. Using the data store, what we found really reduces the risk of data breaches and increases the security of the whole process. Before, if we had a number of boroughs wanting to share this sort of sensitive data on children in London, then they might be emailing each other encrypted spreadsheets. Obviously, email isn't a super safe way of moving data around at all. There's definitely no auditing around it, which we do have on the data store. So using the data store just means there's one point of contact, one neutral place, and it's a focus that we can kind of generate interest and support and vision around how we can, encourage more types of data sharing to happen. And what's really helpful is that the people who are coming up with these projects don't need to be an expert on setting up a common data sharing platform. They can just use the London platform, which is there for everyone and free to use. So we are very strongly advocating for this, and happy to speak to people in other areas about how to get one of these set up, what the benefits are in more detail. Some of the interesting projects that are on there at the moment, we're looking at, as I mentioned, some quite sensitive projects around sharing data around vulnerable children to track their outcomes after having interventions and being supported by children's social care, and understanding how they're getting on once moving through that system. We have a lot on information governance, and obviously this is quite specific to each kind of legal jurisdiction. So what we've tried to do is just make it as simple as possible for the UK context of information governance. In London, we've got a board where all of the information governance leads for the different London boroughs meet regularly. What we've been doing is encouraging people who are setting up data projects to, at an early stage, go and speak to that board and let them know what you're thinking of doing. And the reason that we do that is because if you inform the IG and legal people early, they can raise those questions that you need to consider in project design at an early stage. So you can factor those in and make sure you're not, you've designed this brilliant project, but then you try to get legal sign off at the end, and there's a huge block that you didn't foresee. So we encourage everyone to go and speak to that group early, get their insights and get their buy-in and get them excited about what you're doing. And I think that has really, really helped accelerate the way this works. What's brilliant about working in this way is that if you take a small pilot with a couple of organizations wanting to share data between them, you build up trust there, you build up understanding, you get the legal expertise, advise you on what to do, and then when you need to scale, you go back to the same board, and you've already got the basis and trust because you've met those people before. They know what you're about and why you're doing it. They've seen that you've done it in a safe and legal way, and they're much more likely to help you scale that to a London level. We've got a few more details on kind of specific processes around how to deal with information governance in London, and again, this is all about just making it easy and repeatable for people wanting to do these projects. They're not going to be experts on information governance, so just basically give them bite-sized chunks of information to make it as easy as possible for them to get on with their projects and not get bogged down in having to become information governance experts themselves. that information is there. It just needs to be curated in an easy to understand way so that people can get on with the exciting bits of the project. We've also got a couple of tools that we recommend boroughs use. These are around sharing. These again help on the legal side of things. So we've got information sharing agreements on the information sharing gateway, which is basically just a digital way to take the paperwork that's required in signing information sharing agreements. Everyone can collaboratively work on those online, and then you just kind of add the email address of whoever needs to sign it, and it can be signed digitally. So just removes the paperwork, keeps a record of it for everyone to see, makes it easier. Dapians for digital privacy impact assessments. It's a similar principle, collaboratively working on those DPIAs and then getting them signed digitally. Again, with both of these areas, if you've gone through the outcomes methodology first, then you can complete your DPIA very easily, because most of that form is saying, why are you moving this data? Who's going to be affected? If you've worked out what the outcomes are at the start of the project, then you've already written your DPIA pretty much. So that's very much why we start with the outcomes. So I've showed you the data store. I'll just take you through a couple of so another principle we have is we've got these 6 principles, but how do we make sure people use it? It's easy to publish stuff and then just leave it there, and no one reads it. It just sits on your website and gathers dust. We need to encourage people to use these principles in practice, show them the value of it, and that really is where LOTI comes in terms of running projects and living by our own principles, ensuring that we actually do as we preach. And so some of the projects that we've been running, there's one that our colleagues at the GLA who actually run the London data store have been doing, using some private sector data sets, using data from telecoms companies to understand how busy high streets and town centres are, and shopping areas. Same using data from MasterCard on where spending is happening or where spending isn't happening, and some work using CCTV cameras to count people and cars and things like that. The objective here is to help London boroughs understand which high streets might need support in recovery post-COVID. We know that some areas have been badly affected, but we need to understand with data which specific ones and where where interventions need to be made and what types of interventions. So that data is all there on the data store and is available for boroughs to access. Lots of it's available openly, and then there is some closed off data that's only available for the development teams. The other part of this is, I realize I'm kind of at time, aren't I? So I'll just quickly rattle through this. So sometimes you just need to encourage projects to happen. This is one we're funding. Using the data store to map data around digital exclusion and delivered with outcomes focused. We've got projects mapping the electric vehicle charging points across London, again on the data store. We've also developed, this is slightly different, we've developed some tender wording because one of the things we realise is that actually accessing data from legacy systems can be hard. So in the future, we want suppliers to make sure to give us access to that data. So we've written some kind of boilerplate contract clauses that can go into new contracts to make sure we always have access to APIs in new data systems. So yeah, key lessons, make it as easy and repeatable for people as possible, give people practical guidance and tools so they don't need to reinterpret. Work with your stakeholders and partners to validate those principles and help them live them in real life, learn the lessons, test and iterate. It's not going to be perfect at the beginning, and ours aren't perfect by any means. We're evolving them and growing them as we go. And we need to keep pushing leadership to recognise the importance of data too. Sorry, I ran over there a little bit. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much. Super interesting. It's a really interesting overview and good examples and steps to follow. So thanks for sharing your experience. I will invite now Peck from Open North to share his presentation and explain us a little bit about open data.
Hi, everybody. Okay. So my name is Peck. I am the applied research lead here at Open North. Open North is very briefly. Open North is a nonprofit based in Montreal, in Canada. We have some of our starting roots in civic technology, in building participatory budgeting apps, for example, and supporting civil society in being able to share data on citizen participation. So a very brief agenda. I'll be covering a quick overview of what is open data. I'll be going through some of the discourse on why open data is viewed as important. I'll be trying to focus as much as possible on observations and what we've seen in practice, and trying to draw out a few key practices for you here. And then I'll close up with some lessons learned and observations that we've had over the past 10 years of operation. Just to note that I will be going perhaps a little fast, but I encourage everybody to come back and watch the recording afterwards, and the slides will be provided afterwards for your reading as well. So what is open data? Open data, a common definition that we like to follow is from the Open Knowledge Foundation, or Open Knowledge International, and that defines open data as data that anyone can freely access, use, modify, share for any purpose. This can include commercial purposes as well. When we think of open data, the focus today will be open government data. I'll be referring to examples from government, from municipal level government all the way up to national level government. And often we'll find examples of open data in catalogs, websites like you see here in these slides. Open data can be anything. It can be anything from a table showing some results of a study or samples, to a map of your bike trails in your city. But what I'd like to kind of take note of here is that often when we think of open data, we often think about a place or a space associated with that data. In that way, spatial data is a large proportion of open data that is released by government. A number of high-level principles are often followed in the open data community. The principles that you see on the right side of the screen, the 6 principles here, are from the Open Data Charter. This originated from a meeting at the G8 back in 2013, and it has since been continued by the Open Data Charter Secretariat. As you'll see here, some of the principles that you see are very much aligned with what does good data look like in general. We like our data to be released in a timely manner. We want it to be up to date. We want it to be complete. But some of it can also be an aspirational norm for what open data could be. And we can often assign some normative ideas to open data in terms of what we hope the outcomes or impacts will be. different communities will also have different needs for open data. The open data itself doesn't have a specific domain, so it's an idea that can be adopted and adapted by any number of different disciplines and communities. And depending on where you come from, you might you might have a certain a need for open data and certain values assigned to that. So if you're focusing on government transparency and government accountability, you may be focusing on certain kinds of data. You may be emphasizing issues more around democratic participation. But if you're also focused on improving data-driven decision-making and evidence-based policy-making within government, you may have a different set of needs for open data to connect people internally, perhaps, within government. Open data has also been linked in the past to international development efforts. One example is the Open Data for Development Network, funded by the International Development Research Centre in Canada. So why open data? Why is open data important? I'm trying to distill the needs for open data into some common elements here. So open data can be seen as a form of transparency, so a form of government transparency. Simply making government data available allows one to see more into what government is doing or what it produces and what kind of analysis it does. But I would also try to distinguish between transparency and accountability here. Data can also be used to support citizen engagement with government, and the process of which, if there's a real follow through, can potentially lead to better accountability in traditional public consultation mechanisms, for example. Data can also be increasing in government accountability through the use of documentation and metadata that really demonstrate how government achieves its data-driven decision-making. Openness and open data is also seen as a way to increase efficiency within government. There are a lot of advocates for open data that believe that improved information flows, better access to data can also help alleviate some of the core problems that government often finds itself in, which is the issue of data silos. Setting up an open data portal within a government can actually be much simpler than in making sure that one government database is talking to another government database. And also, it can be there are arguments that we can use open data to reduce the costs of traditional information sharing and access to information processes between citizens and government. Final argument for open data is around the potential for open data for generating growth and driving innovation in any given economy. Simply put, more access to data could potentially lead to more analysis and more insights on, for example, public services. Some of this is very much belief-driven, I would have to note, and not all of the evidence that we'd like to see is there yet in terms of some of the benefits of open data. So that's something to take into account. So what do we do in practice? I'm starting off with the issue of policy, and that may be a key concern for some of you in the audience. And I have a couple of core messages here around policy. One of the first being policy coherence is quite an important issue. Cities, especially these days, will have multiple different areas of interest. Digital strategies are important for governments. Smart cities are also an area of concern, but also transparency and accountability is also evidenced through policies such as open government directives and open government policies, and ensuring that all of those policies are aligned and have some relevance to open data. That requires work. We have been seeing a growing convergence, I would say, of open data and open government policy. You can see examples such as Canada's own action plan on open government, which treats open data as a core pillar of its open government strategy. But I would also like to note and I guess reassure that policy isn't necessarily the first step you have to take, and from what we have seen in Canada, policy has not always been the first step that has been taken before open data has been released. Some of the history of open data, of the open data movement in Canada is that cities actually decided to create open data, set up an open data portal and create open data before even formalizing open data strategies. And strategy itself is not always a requirement, but it's always valuable. Embedding an open data strategy into other strategies like smart city and digital strategies are also valid tactics that we've seen different governments take. Organizational culture is another key area of concern here. So open data does not only result in a technical transformation of government process. Releasing open data does involve the implementation technology, but it also requires changes in human process. This means that we want to think about company strategies and policies. We want to think about changes in organizational culture around data sharing and alignment of business process as well. And this is something that takes a lot of time. That being said, there's a lot that's already been that is already out there on open data that is already being tried, and there's a lot actually to copy from. An example that I like to give is that in some of the early days of the open data movement, the UK was actually quite at the forefront of developing some of the tools that governments could use to implement open data. For example, the UK's open government license, and this was actually adopted and ported over to a number of Canadian cities and to support their own implementation of open data as they were leading the charge in Canada. You also have, I would also recommend taking a look at Creative Commons, the CC BY licensing. A lot of guidelines also exist. If you're looking for places to start, I would start looking at existing guidelines, existing handbooks and toolkits. There are plenty out there. And what's more, it's also a good idea to take a look at existing government policies and their own internal handbooks. These exist to guide different departments and agencies in a given country on how to implement open data. Engaging the community is also incredibly important. Understanding what their needs are is very important, but also understanding what we have, what the government has available to give to citizens is also important. You're dealing with a bit of an information gap here, and And there's often a perception that data sets can exist as you see them on a government data portal. But often that is actually not the case. Often we have a large database somewhere where we need to query and extract data that then gets transformed into a data set on an open data catalog. So some engagement is needed to bridge some of these perception gaps and really try to focus on what is it that the community needs. I have a couple of more slides, and then I'll be wrapping up. So continued engagement is also essential. People want data, and the more you give, the more that can raise expectations of the responsiveness of government. That's something. Expectation setting is a key issue here to sustain citizen engagement in open data. I've just mentioned information asymmetries. Events are also a key vector through which governments like to promote engagement. I would like to note that the hackathon model has seen quite a lot of initial uptake, but some of the real benefits are still to be proven. But the main message here is that engagement is a long-term process. Change agents are also important. I'm 1 minute over time. I'm about to finish. Change agents are also very important. Open data has traditionally been championed by internal change agents, individuals who are highly motivated and potentially willing to take up risks in order to speak up and lead organizational culture change, to get open data policies implemented, get new technologies implemented, and just get their colleagues and peers to share data. And there are a number of different tools and techniques that we can use to try to support those change agents. So just to wrap up, knowing what's been done in the past is very important. So a lot of the work on how to share data between governments has already been tackled by the GIS community, for example. And knowing what's been done in the past can help one identify those key allies within government that one should be partnering with. Maintaining momentum is also incredibly difficult to do, and it should be noted that open data does not mean it's free. There are costs to creating open data. Understanding needs is very important. Not everybody has the same needs for the same type of data, and they'll need data in different levels of granularity. And it's important to make the distinction between transparency and accountability. And the more documentation you provide, the more process that you open up, the more feedback loops that you provide to with citizens, the more we can turn open data from pure transparency to a form of accountability. And finally, I'd also like to note that some of it does really require a lot of belief. Data is something that is inherently difficult to track, and when it's open for reuse anywhere by anybody, that means that we just simply have to be willing to accept that we cannot fully measure the impact of releasing a given data set. And finally, knowing what your problem is and the reasons for sharing data is very important to make sure that people are getting what they need. I have included at the end of my slides a list of suggested resources. This will be available as the slides are shared as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Peg, for the presentations. Really interesting two presentations we had today, and we're gonna have next 5 to 10 minutes. If you have any questions that you might have for our two amazing speakers, thanks for being so on time with your slides and presentation as well. So in the chat box, or just please unmute yourselves to ask any questions you have. We have a couple of questions in the chat box throughout your presentation. So the first one asks, what do you think is the most necessary institutional arrangement for making a data or open data strategy work? I guess it could be addressed to both of you. If you want to address that question, please go ahead.
Go on, Peck. I think that's for you, really.
I'm going to interpret institutional. First off, thank you for your question. I'm going to interpret institutional arrangements rather broadly here. When we talk about making an open data strategy work, open data is never just one single unit within government or within a city government. And strategies are meant to be adopted government-wide. That means that finding your key allies across different government units and establishing maybe not formal arrangements, but understandings between departments, between agencies, is probably very important just to get the understanding and alignment on the strategy going first.
Thank you for the answer. Jay, do you have any additional comments on that question?
No, I think it's, you know, initially if you're starting from scratch, then it needs to be that kind of strategic priority to begin with. I think the only way that you can compel all these different actors to work in this way is for, you know, there to be this understanding that this is going to be the way we all do things. Start with some small initiatives and build out from there, demonstrate the value, you know, kind of work in that iterative way.
We've noticed that executive leadership is executive support is very important for this sort of endeavor. Executive support for the manager level, who can then support lower levels within government.
Yeah, okay, thanks for the answers there. Next question is about how can open data help with COVID-19 recovery? So I guess, Peck, you could answer that.
Sure. I guess that would, thank you, Darryl, for your question. I think that would also depend on what data we're talking about. So open data can definitely cover a variety of topics. So we have your sort of general statistics on infection rates and death rates and so forth. That can be data that is useful for a limited type of use case. But if you're interested in taking stock of what happened in the past, good open data would allow us to understand, okay, how well have infection rates improved over the past months, and enable citizens, researchers outside of government to, I guess, question a little around government, the efficacy of government policies in the relevant jurisdictions. And open data there it really helps us. It really helps us take a challenge function to government. It allows anybody to do their own analysis in so many words.
I think just to add to that, even from, you know, within the government perspective, having data open means that when a crisis hits, you can quickly draw together data sets which help you manage response quickly, because the data is already there in the open for everyone to use. And, you know, there are significant barriers sharing data between different departments and different teams, even within government. So having it open actually just removes those barriers. And in London, we've got quite extensive dashboards available which are used for managing COVID response, which are open to the public to view, as well as for decision makers within local government. So yeah, I think it's, you know, when crisis hits, if that data is there, then you can move much faster. Otherwise, you're scrabbling around to get authorization to release it and share it with different teams and different actors.
Thank you for that. Next question from Zahid Ali in the chat box asked, he said, it's important initiative, and how do you advise to have open data strategy for developing countries where not much attention is given to data? So some perspective advice for the developing countries.
I can take a first stab at that. Thank you for your question. The open data community and the discourse on open data has very much involved civil society organizations, nonprofits, advocacies, people who outside of government who have a stake and an interest in getting government to open more data. There's very likely in any given country a set of people who have knowledge, have potentially more expertise in data science, in social sciences, in research, and who are willing and able to share that and collaborate with government. And we've seen a lot of that happen in formal collaborations between government and a nonprofit organization in developing apps, developing visualization platforms, for example, for open data. And so collaboration outside of government is also a valid tactic here.
On that note, Peg, I would like to have another question about collaboration with different stakeholders. What are the challenges that you face when you try to advocate for open data, when you have multiple stakeholders that might have differing interests, as you mentioned?
That's a key challenge. When we have multiple stakeholders in the room who come from different backgrounds but have a general interest in the same topic area. For example, environmental issues may have different representatives from academia to environmental advocacy groups to residents in a given community who need data for different reasons. And when you have that, it can be a little challenging to separate out the different needs for government to understand, well, okay, this person needs this person needs that. But it's also difficult for government to, it can be difficult for government to communicate the limitations of what they can provide as well. And pleasing everybody, providing every single format, providing every kind of detail that is needed can be a challenge, and that can lead to challenges in meeting expectations.
Definitely, thanks for that. So there's another question from Sylvia in the chat box. How to link open data and participation processes, for instance, with citizens or other actors, or in co-creation initiatives? Any significant examples to be inspired from?
I could take that question. One example that we've seen that can work potentially is participatory budgeting, for example, and that's work that Open North used to engage in, and that's the idea that you engage a government can make its budget plan for the next year open, and as part of a traditional budget consultation cycle, you don't only congregate people in a single room in the town hall and have a physical meeting, but you also get people to provide feedback through an online platform that can engage people in balancing the budget themselves. And that's a much more engaged, much more interactive form of citizen engagement that also generates data and then allows government to come back, provide feedback, report back on what they've heard, and continue the process from there.
Jay, would you like to add any answer to that question as well?
No, I think that's a really good example from Peck there.
Thank you for already answering some of the questions in the chat box, Jay. Okay, if we have any other question, will the presentation be shared? Yes, after the event closes, we're gonna share the presentation slides with further resources, reading materials through the email newsletter format. So you will have opportunity to watch the recording of this session as well as the presentation slides. So we do this Smart Cities training series every 2 weeks. So this was the webinar number 3. We've had session 4 weeks ago on digital connectivity and 2 weeks ago on human-centered design for public services. So this time we were focusing on data governance. So it's been really great to have both speakers today with us. The idea behind the training series is to have really a compact 30 to 45 minute session to all the practitioners and UNDP country offices to learn from the experts. So it's been great to have 2 speakers for today's session as well. If any of you have any more questions, please feel free to share it in the chat box. If not, I think we are just over 10 minutes, then this is supposed to be a 45-minute session. So I think it would be interesting to have more questions, or if that's the end, we should thank both of our speakers for joining us today. Okay, I think there's one question. Is it a question? Zafar asked, very useful info on tools, essential legal framework for protection and sustainability of data. Okay, I think it was a comment. So we learned today from Open North some of the work that they have been doing in promoting open data, and from London Office of Technology and Innovation on advocating for collaboration, data collaboration within the City of London. So it's been great to hear so much of insights from both of our speakers, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And hopefully we are going to have most of you join us for our next session, which is happening on Thursday, 8th of April. So speakers, do you have any final comments? If not, thank you again for the presentations and insights and informative discussion today.
No comments. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jay. Thanks everyone for attending our session today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. See you in the next session, everyone. Bye.